Hello, and welcome back to Whispers in the Dark, the channel where we explore the shadowed corners of human nature and the stories that are too terrifying to be fiction. We delve into the cases that make you lock your doors at night. The ones that prove the most dangerous monsters are often the ones we invite into our homes. Today, we have a story that is profoundly disturbing. It's a tale of family ties that twist into a noose, of a simple no that spirals into an act of unimaginable brutality. It's a story that will stay with you long after the screen goes dark. But before we descend into this shocking case, if you're a fan of true crime, deep mysteries, and stories that challenge your understanding of the world, please take a moment to click that subscribe button below. And don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new investigation. Your support allows us to keep bringing these important, cautionary tales to light. Ready? Then take a deep breath. We're about to unravel the chilling case of Alara, her brother-in-law Liam, and the gruesome discovery at the bottom of a forgotten well. The facade of suburban tranquility was an art form in the sleepy town of Maple Creek. It was practiced in the perfectly manicured lawns, the synchronized Sunday morning car washes, and the cheerful, almost rehearsed, waves exchanged between neighbors. Alara Vance was a master of this art. Her home, a charming two-story colonial with pristine white siding and a porch swing that swayed in the gentlest of breezes, was a testament to her dedication. It was the centerpiece of a life she had meticulously constructed with her husband, Tom. A life of stability, predictability, and, above all, safety. Thomas was the bedrock of that life. A kind, steady man with a placid temperament, he worked as a civil engineer for the county, a job that mirrored his personality. Structured, reliable, and devoid of surprises. He loved Alara with a quiet, unwavering devotion that she cherished more than anything. Together, they were raising two children, 7-year-old Lily and 5-year-old Ben, who filled the meticulously clean halls of their home with the chaotic, joyful symphony of childhood. To anyone looking in, the Vances were the embodiment of the Maple Creek dream. But a single, dissonant note had been introduced into their peaceful composition, and its name was Liam. Liam was Thomas's younger brother, and he was everything Thomas was not. Where Thomas was stable, Liam was a whirlwind. Where Thomas was predictable, Liam was a rogue wave. He was handsome, with a roguish charm that he wielded like a weapon, disarming strangers and leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty promises in his wake. He drifted from job to job, from one get-rich-quick scheme to another, always landing on his feet, usually with a handout for a loan from his older, more responsible brother. Thomas, ever the dutiful sibling, always obliged. "He's just finding his way, Alara," he would say, signing another check. "He's got a good heart deep down." Alara had never seen that good heart. From the moment she'd met Liam 10 years ago, she'd felt a prickle of unease. His compliments were always a little too slick, his gaze lingered a fraction of a second too long, and his casual to chase a hand on her arm, a brush against her back in the hallway felt less like familial affection and more like a test of boundaries. She was polite, for Thomas's sake, but she kept him at arm's length, maintaining a cool, impenetrable wall that seemed only to intrigue him further. The trouble truly began 6 months ago when Liam's latest business venture, a disastrous foray into cryptocurrency trading, imploded spectacularly. He arrived on their doorstep, not with a suitcase, but with the wreckage of his life packed into the trunk of a leased sports car he could no longer afford. He was broke, homeless, and, as always, brimming with excuses. "It's just until I get back on my feet, Tom," he'd pleaded, his eyes wide and earnest. "A month, maybe 2. I'll be out of your hair before you know it." Thomas, blinded by brotherly loyalty, had agreed without even consulting Alara. He'd seen a sibling in need. Alara had seen a predator being invited into her sanctuary. The guest room, once a quiet space for her sewing projects, became Liam's den. The scent of his expensive, cloying cologne permeated the house, a constant, unwelcome reminder of his presence. The first month was bearable. Liam was on his best behavior, playing the part of the grateful, down-on-his-luck brother. He played with Lily and Ben in the yard, praised Alara's cooking with theatrical flair, and spoke of promising job interviews that never seemed to materialize. But as weeks turned into months, the facade began to crack. The job search became a half-hearted affair. He started sleeping in late, treating their home like a hotel, and his compliments towards Alara took on a more personal, more invasive tone. "You know, Ellie," he said one evening, cornering her in the kitchen as she washed dishes, his voice a low purr. "Tom is a lucky man. Most women let themselves go after a couple of kids. But you just get more beautiful." He reached out, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were cold against her skin. Alara flinched and stepped back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Please don't do that, Liam." He just grinned, a slow, wolfish smile. "Do what? Pay my beautiful sister-in-law a compliment? Is that a crime now?" She told Thomas about it later that night, her voice trembling slightly. "He's crossing a line, Tom. I'm not comfortable with him in the house anymore. He needs to go." Thomas sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. He looked tired. "He's just being Liam, honey. He's a flirt, he doesn't mean anything by it. He's just trying to be friendly. His life is a mess right now. Let's just give him a little more time." Alara felt a cold knot of frustration and fear tighten in her stomach. Thomas couldn't see it. He couldn't see the predatory gleam in his brother's eyes, the calculated nature of his words. To him, it was just Liam being Liam. To her, it felt like a siege. The siege escalated. Liam started accidentally walking in on her when she was getting out of the shower, offering a theatrical, insincere apology. He would leave notes for her, filled with flowery, inappropriate praise. He began to subtly undermine Thomas, making little jokes about his predictable routine, his simple tastes. He was trying to drive a wedge to isolate her. Each incident was small enough, ambiguous enough, that complaining about it made her sound paranoid, hysterical. Liam was an expert at this kind of psychological warfare. The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. Thomas was at a regional conference an hour away and wouldn't be home until late. The kids were at school. Alara was in the garden, her hands buried in the cool earth, trying to find a moment of peace as she tended to her autumn roses. It was a beautiful day, the sky a crisp, cloudless blue, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When she stood up, brushing the dirt from her knees, he was there, leaning against the back door frame, a glass of iced tea in his hand. He was smiling that same predatory smile. "Working hard?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. "Just finishing up," she replied coolly, refusing to meet his eyes. She began gathering her tools, desperate to get back inside, to lock the door behind her. "You don't have to be afraid of me, you know," he said, stepping out onto the patio. He moved with a liquid grace that she found repellent. "I'm not afraid of you, Liam. I'm busy." He chuckled, a low, condescending sound. "Are you? Or are you just avoiding me? It's okay, I get it. This spark between us. It's probably confusing for you, being married to a guy like Tom." Alara's head snapped up, her eyes blazing with a fury she could no longer contain. "There is no spark, Liam. There is nothing between us. You are my husband's brother, and you are a guest in our house. A guest who has seriously overstayed his welcome." His smile faltered for a second, replaced by a flash of anger, but he recovered quickly. He took a slow step towards her, then another. "Don't lie to yourself, Ellie. I see the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching. You're bored. Tom is a good man, a reliable man. He's a lawnmower. He does the job, but there's no thrill. I'm a sports car, and you've always wanted to see what it feels like to go fast." He was close now, so close she could smell the whiskey on his breath, even in the middle of the afternoon. Her gardening trowel was still in her hand, its weight suddenly feeling significant. Her heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. "You need to leave," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You need to pack your things and leave this house. Today." "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered, his eyes dropping to her lips. "Not until I get what I want." And then he lunged, grabbing her arms, his fingers digging into her flesh like talons. He tried to pull her against him, his mouth seeking hers. A primal scream of terror and rage ripped through Alara. She reacted on pure instinct. She twisted her body, bringing the hand holding the trowel up in a desperate arc, and slammed the heavy metal edge of it against the side of his head. There was a sickening, wet thud. Liam's eyes went wide with shock, a look of genuine surprise replacing the arrogant lust. He grunted, his grip on her arms loosening. He staggered back a step, his hand flying to his temple, where a dark line of blood was already beginning to well. "You bitch!" he slurred, his balance failing him. He stumbled backward, tripping over a misplaced terracotta pot. He fell hard, his head cracking against the stone patio with a sound that made Alara's stomach heave. He didn't move. Alara stood frozen, her chest rising and falling in ragged, shallow breaths. The trowel fell from her nerveless fingers, clattering onto the stones. Silence descended, broken only by the chirping of a sparrow on the fence and the frantic pounding in her own ears. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the perfect blue sky. A pool of dark blood was beginning to spread out from under his head, a grotesque stain on the clean patio stones. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had just been defending herself. It was self-defense. But who would believe her? They would see the months of tension, her complaints to Thomas. They would see her as the hysterical wife who finally snapped. They would see Liam, the charming, misunderstood brother, as the victim. They would take her away. They would take her away from Lily and Ben. That single thought cut through the fog of her terror with the clarity of a shard of glass. My children. She couldn't let them lose their mother. She couldn't let this one horrific moment destroy the perfect, safe life she had built for them. The art of maintaining a facade. That was her specialty. Her mind, which moments before had been a chaotic storm, became chillingly calm. The problem was no longer Liam's assault. The problem was his body. A body on her patio. She looked at her watch. The kids would be home from school in less than 2 hours. Thomas wouldn't be back for at least 6. She had a window. The next few hours passed in a surreal, methodical blur. Her actions were detached, precise, as if she were watching a character in a movie. First, she dragged him. It was harder than she'd imagined. He was a dead weight, heavy and awkward. She pulled him by the armpits, his shoes scraping along the stone, leaving faint scuff marks she would have to remember to clean. She hauled him into the small, windowless garden shed at the back of the property, the place where she kept the lawnmower. Tom's a lawnmower. His voice echoed in her head. She pushed the thought away. She locked the shed door. Next, the patio. She got a bucket, hot water, and bleach, scrubbing at the bloodstain with a ferocity that made her knuckles raw. She scrubbed until the stone was paler than the surrounding area, then scrubbed the whole section to make it blend. She picked up the shattered pieces of the terracotta pot and disposed of them in the neighbor's trash bin. Not her own. She retrieved the trowel, washed it meticulously in the kitchen sink, and placed it back in her gardening basket. She went inside, stripped off her clothes, and showered, washing away any trace of him. As the hot water streamed over her, she began to construct the new reality. Liam had left. That was the story. He'd packed a bag and left. He'd done it before, disappearing for weeks at a time. It was believable. It was in character. When the school bus rumbled to a stop at the end of the street, Alara was on the porch, a serene smile on her face, a plate of freshly baked cookies on the table beside her. She hugged Lily and Ben, asked about their day, and listened to their stories with the focused attention of a loving mother. Nothing was wrong. Everything was perfect. When Thomas came home that night, tired from his conference, she was waiting for him. She let him settle in, get a drink, unwind. Then, with a carefully practiced sigh of weary relief, she told him. "Liam's gone," she said, her voice a mixture of annoyance and resignation. Thomas looked up from his newspaper. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "We had a fight," she explained, twisting her wedding ring, a gesture of anxiety she knew he would find convincing. "He said some things. some awful, inappropriate things to me again. I told him I couldn't take it anymore, that he had to leave. I told him you'd agree with me. He got angry, packed a duffel bag, and stormed out. He said he was going to stay with a friend in the city. She watched his face, gauging his reaction. He looked exhausted and sad, but most of all, he looked relieved. The burden of his brother's presence was gone. "Oh," he said quietly. "Well, honestly, Alara, I think it's for the best. I'm sorry you had to deal with that. I should have listened to you sooner." He believed her. The first thread of her new narrative had been successfully woven into the tapestry of their lives. That night, Alara lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her husband's steady breathing beside her. There was a body in their garden shed. A dead body, the brother of the man sleeping next to her. But in the house all was quiet. The children were safe in their beds. The facade was intact. For 2 days, she lived on a knife's edge of adrenaline and dread. Every time the phone rang, her heart leaped into her throat. Every car that slowed down on their street seemed to be a police car. In the dead of night, she would slip out of the house, her bare feet silent on the cool grass, and check the lock on the shed. The air around it was already beginning to carry a faint, sweet, sickly smell that made her stomach churn. She knew she couldn't leave him there. The shed was not a solution. It was a temporary holding cell. Their property ended at a thicket of woods, and a quarter-mile through those woods was an old, forgotten farmer's well, capped with a rotting wooden lid. As kids, Thomas and Liam used to play there, daring each other to climb down the crumbling stone walls. It was deep. No one had used it in 50 years. The plan that formed in her mind was monstrous, a product of a part of herself she never knew existed. But the alternative, losing her children, destroying her family, was infinitely worse. She needed tools. Thomas's workshop in the garage was a treasure trove. A heavy-duty tarpaulin, a reciprocating saw with a new blade designed for pruning thick branches, heavy rope, work gloves. On the third night, a moonless, overcast night, she put her plan into action. After Thomas and the children were sound asleep, she crept out into the darkness. The work she did in that shed, illuminated by a single battery-powered lantern, was the stuff of nightmares. She worked with a chilling, detached efficiency, her mind compartmentalizing the horror, focusing only on the mechanics of the task. She was not dismantling a man, a brother-in-law. She was processing a problem. She was eliminating a threat. She wrapped the heavy, tarpaulin-covered bundles with rope, her knots sure and tight. The journey through the woods was an ordeal. She had to make multiple trips, dragging the unthinkable bundles through the undergrowth, her muscles screaming in protest. The silence of the forest was absolute, amplifying every snap of a twig, every rustle of a leaf. Finally, she reached the well. With a crowbar from the garage, she pried off the rotting wooden lid. A wave of cool, damp, earthy air washed over her. She didn't let herself hesitate. One by one, she rolled the heavy bundles over the edge, listening to the sickening splash as they hit the dark water far below. When the task was done, she replaced the lid and painstakingly scattered leaves and branches over it, erasing any sign of her presence. She walked back home, disposed of her soiled clothes and the saw blade in a weighted trash bag, and submerged it in the deepest part of the creek that ran behind their neighborhood. She showered again, scrubbing her skin until it was red and raw. She slipped back into bed beside Thomas just as the first hints of dawn were painting the sky gray. He stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. She lay there, her body aching, her mind unervingly clear. It was done. The threat was gone, buried. The unraveling thread had been snipped. 2 weeks later, Thomas's parents called. They hadn't heard from Liam. This wasn't unusual, but a month-long silence was stretching their patience. "He's probably just off on one of his adventures," Thomas reassured them, with Alara listening on the extension, her heart a cold, heavy stone in her chest. But after another week, with Liam's phone going straight to voicemail and his social media account silent, the worry began to curdle into real fear. It was Thomas's mother who insisted. "Something feels wrong, Thomas," she'd cried over the phone. "I know my boy. He would have called me by now. Please, you have to call the police. You have to file a missing person report." And so Thomas did. He went down to the Maple Creek police station and sat across from a weary-eyed detective. He recounted the story that Alara had given him. The argument, the packed bag, Liam's angry departure. He didn't know that with every word, he was laying the foundation of a formal investigation, inviting the outside world to peer behind the perfect facade of their lives. He didn't know he was starting a countdown, ticking toward the moment when the secrets buried in the dark would be brought violently, gruesomely, into the light. The arrival of Detective Miles Harding at the Vance residence was as quiet and unassuming as the man himself. He didn't come with sirens or flashing lights. He came in a nondescript, mud-splattered sedan that looked as tired as he did. Harding was a man in his late 50s with a face that seemed to be carved from worry lines and skepticism. He had been a detective in Maple Creek for 30 years, a tenure that had taught him one fundamental truth: the prettiest houses often hid the ugliest secrets. He sat in the Vance's immaculate living room, a small, worn notebook open on his knee, his gaze sweeping over the family photos on the mantelpiece. Alara had offered him coffee, which he had accepted. He held the delicate porcelain cup in his large, calloused hands, a study in contrasts. Thomas sat beside Alara on the sofa, looking anxious and tense. Alara, by contrast, projected an image of worried but composed concern. The facade was holding. "So, Mrs. Vance," Harding began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Your husband tells me you were the last person to see Liam. Can you walk me through that day again?" Alara had rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. She took a steadying breath, her eyes downcast as if recalling a painful memory. It was a Tuesday 3 weeks ago. Thomas was at his conference. Liam. He'd been drinking. He started saying things. Inappropriate things. She glanced at Thomas, a flicker of feigned vulnerability in her eyes. He'd done it before, but this time was different. More aggressive. I finally stood up to him. I told him he had to leave, that we couldn't live like this anymore. We argued. He was furious. He went upstairs, threw some things in a duffel bag, and stormed out. He got into his car and drove off. I haven't seen or heard from him since. Her performance was flawless. Her voice quivered in all the right places. She looked like a victim, a woman pushed to her limit by an unwelcome houseguest. Harding nodded slowly, scribbling in his notebook. Did he say where he was going? He muttered something about a friend in the city, someone who understood him, she said, her tone laced with a convincing bitterness. He didn't give a name. And his car? A silver sports coupe, your husband said. Yes, that's right, Thomas interjected. A lease. He was already behind on the payments. We've put out an alert for the vehicle, Harding said, his eyes still on Alara. So far, nothing. No traffic cameras, no toll crossings, no reports from highway patrol. It's like the car, and your brother-in-law, just vanished. He paused, letting the silence hang in the air. Did he take his phone with him? I assume so, Alara said. It was always attached to his hand, right? We pinged it, of course. The last signal was from a tower that covers this neighborhood. The signal died around 3 p.m. on the day he disappeared. Roughly the time you said you argued. Harding looked up from his notes, his gaze sharp and penetrating. You didn't, by any chance, get physical, did you, Mrs. Vance? The argument. The question was a direct hit, but Alara was prepared. No, of course not, she said, her voice rising with indignation. He was yelling. I was yelling. But it never came to that. I just wanted him out of my house, out of my family's life. Harding just nodded again, his expression unreadable. Okay, what about his room? Did he take all his things? I don't know, Thomas admitted. We haven't been in there. We just closed the door. It felt wrong. I'd like to take a look, if you don't mind, the detective said. It wasn't a question. The guest room was exactly as Liam had left it before Alara had killed him. It was a mess. Clothes were strewn across the floor. An empty whiskey bottle sat on the nightstand, and the bed was unmade. It looked like the room of someone who had indeed left in a hurry. But Harding wasn't looking at the clothes. He was looking at the details. He noticed a passport in an open drawer, a laptop on the desk, an expensive watch beside the whiskey bottle. Seems he left a few valuable things behind for someone in a rush, Harding observed nonchalantly, making another note. He turned to Alara. Did he have any enemies, Mrs. Vance? Besides yourself. The jab was subtle, but Alara felt it. I wasn't his enemy, detective. I was his sister-in-law trying to protect my home. As for his enemies, Liam burned a lot of bridges. There were business deals gone bad, women he'd treated poorly. There could be any number of people. The investigation widened. Harding and his small team began to pull at the threads of Liam Vance's life, and they found a tangled, knotted mess. He owed thousands of dollars to a bookie in the city. He had recently been threatened by the angry husband of a woman he'd been seeing. He had scammed 2 former business partners out of a significant sum of money, and they were actively looking for him. Suddenly, the police had a list of potential suspects, and Alara felt a small, dangerous flicker of hope. Liam's chaotic life was her best defense. His disappearance fit his pattern. But Detective Harding was methodical. He was a creature of detail and process. While his team chased down leads on bookies and jealous husbands, he remained focused on the epicenter of the event, the Vance house and the timeline. He came back a week later. This time he brought a forensics team. Just routine, he explained to Thomas and Alara, who stood watching from the doorway as technicians in white overalls dusted for fingerprints in Liam's room. We need to get a DNA sample to match against in case a body turns up. Alara's blood ran cold, but she kept her expression neutral. They wouldn't find anything. She had been meticulous. Harding, however, wasn't just there for the forensics. He wanted to talk to Alara again, this time alone. He asked Thomas to wait in the kitchen while they sat on the patio. The same patio where she had killed Liam. She could feel the ghost of the bloodstain under her feet. I spoke to some of your neighbors, Mrs. Vance, Harding said, his tone conversational. They all say the same thing. You're a wonderful mother, a pillar of the community. Your garden is the envy of the street. He gestured towards her prize-winning roses. You spend a lot of time out here. It's my therapy, she replied, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. One of your neighbors, Mrs. Gable from next door, mentioned something interesting. He continued, his eyes scanning the yard. She said she heard a loud argument that afternoon. Shouting, and then a crash, like something breaking. Pottery, she thought. Did you break a pot, Mrs. Vance? Alara's carefully constructed composure threatened to crack. The terracotta pot. She had forgotten the noise it would have made. Yes, she stammered, thinking fast. During the argument, he was being very aggressive. He backed me up against the house. He knocked over one of my planters. It shattered everywhere. It frightened me. It was a plausible lie, a small deviation from the truth that incorporated the neighbor's testimony. I see, Harding said. And where's the broken pot now? I cleaned it up. I threw it out, she said quickly. I didn't want the kids to see the mess. Which trash can did you put it in? The question was so specific, so unexpected, that she froze for a fraction of a second. Ours, of course. A direct lie. She had put it in the neighbor's bin. A small detail, but a lie nonetheless. Harding didn't react. He just made a note. You have a lovely property here. Backs right onto the woods. His gaze drifted past the manicured lawn, towards the dark line of trees. My team and I will be organizing a search of the area tomorrow. Standard procedure. We'll be bringing in canine units. The blood drained from Alara's face. Dogs. The thought of them, with their keen noses, sniffing through the woods, getting closer and closer to the old well. Do you really think that's necessary? She asked, her voice thin. He drove away, detective. A good detective never assumes, Mrs. Vance, Harding said, closing his notebook. He drove away, or you say he drove away. Right now, all I have is your story. A story from a person who, by her own admission, had a volatile, angry confrontation with a man who disappeared off the face of the earth moments later. Forgive me for being thorough. That night, Alara didn't sleep. She lay awake, her mind racing. The dogs were a complication she hadn't foreseen. The well was deep, and the bundles were heavy. Would the scent be able to travel all the way up? She replayed her conversation with Harding over and over. The pot, the trash can. Small lies, cracks in the facade. She knew that men like Harding didn't just hear the lies. They heard the spaces between them, the hesitations, the slight shifts in tone. The next morning, the quiet of Maple Creek was shattered. Police cars, vans from the local news, and a small army of volunteers descended on their street. Harding directed the search with quiet authority. Alara watched from her kitchen window as a team of officers with German shepherds on leashes fanned out, starting at the edge of her property line and moving into the woods. Each bark from the dogs sent a jolt of pure terror through her. She felt like a trapped animal, forced to watch as the hunters closed in. Thomas was a wreck. The sight of the large-scale search for his missing brother made the situation terrifyingly real. They're treating our backyard like a crime scene, he whispered to Alara, his face pale. They think something happened to him here. They have to look everywhere. Tom, Alara said, placing a reassuring hand on his arm, even as her own insides were churning with acid. They don't know Liam. We do. He's probably halfway across the country, laughing about all this. The search lasted all day. Alara went through the motions of her life. She made lunch for Thomas, she read a story to Ben, she helped Lily with a drawing. But her ears were constantly tuned to the sounds coming from the woods. By late afternoon, the search teams began to emerge from the trees. Their shoulders slumped. The dogs had found nothing. No scent trail, no discarded clothing, no signs of a struggle. The woods were clean. Alara allowed herself a moment of profound, dizzying relief. She had been careful. Her meticulous planning had paid off. But her relief was short-lived. Harding hadn't been with the search teams. He had spent the day re-interviewing Liam's associates. That evening, he returned to the Vance house. "Good news and bad news, folks," he said, standing in their entryway, refusing to come in. "The good news is we found Liam's car." Thomas and Alara exchanged a look. "Where?" Thomas asked. "In a long-term parking garage at the city bus station. Wiped clean of prints, of course. It's been there since the day he disappeared. The parking ticket was tucked under the windshield wiper." "So he did leave," Thomas said, a wave of relief washing over his face. "He took a bus. He could be anywhere." "That's the bad news," Harding said, his eyes locking onto Alara. "We pulled the security footage from the garage and the bus station. We have hours of tape from that afternoon. We see the silver coupe pull in. We see a figure get out wearing a hoodie and a baseball cap that hides their face. The figure wipes down the car, tucks the ticket, and walks to the station. But here's the thing. This person, their height, their build, is not a match for Liam Vance. He was 6'2". This person is much smaller. Maybe 5'7" or 5'8" at most." Alara's breath caught in her throat. She was 5'7". "Furthermore," Harding continued, his voice dropping, "the person walks into the bus station but never buys a ticket. They walk straight through the building and out a back exit, into an alleyway where there are no cameras. It wasn't Liam. It was someone dumping his car, making it look like he left town." The air in the hallway was thick with unspoken accusation. Thomas looked from Harding to Alara, his brow furrowed in confusion. "But who would do that? Why?" "That's the question I've been asking myself all day," Harding said, his gaze unwavering. "Who had a motive to want Liam gone? And who had the opportunity to take his car and dump it, right after he supposedly stormed out of this house?" The facade, so carefully constructed, so meticulously maintained, was beginning to crumble. It wasn't just small cracks anymore. Harding was hammering at the very foundation of her story. He had no proof, Nothing to directly tie her to the car, but he had suspicion, and Alara knew that for a man like Harding, suspicion was a seed, and he would water it and tend to it until it finally bore its ugly fruit. The media frenzy began. Liam's disappearance was no longer a local news item. It was picked up by national outlets. The vanished brother-in-law. The story was compelling. A handsome, troubled man, a family with secrets, and a police investigation that was hitting a dead end. Reporters camped out on their street. Alara felt like she was living in a fishbowl. Every trip to the grocery store, every school run, scrutinized by prying eyes and cameras. The whispers started among the neighbors. The friendly waves were replaced by quick, averted glances. The pressure began to take its toll on Thomas. The doubt, planted by Harding and nurtured by the media circus, began to sprout in his mind. One night, after watching a news report that painted Liam as a victim and hinted at a family dispute, he turned to Alara, his eyes filled with a pain she had never seen before. "Did you tell me everything, Alara?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Everything that happened that day?" "Yes, Tom. I've told you. I've told the police. I've told everyone," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the panic that was clawing at her throat. "But the car. Harding thinks. He thinks whoever argued with Liam is the one who dumped his car. That means..." He couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't voice the terrible thought. "He's trying to scare me," Alara insisted, taking his hands in hers. "He has no other suspects, so he's trying to pin it on me. It's us against them, Tom. You have to believe me." He looked at her, wanting to believe, but the cracks were showing in him, too. The investigation had stretched into a month. Then, too, the seasons began to turn. Autumn's crisp air gave way to the first chill of winter. Liam's case grew cold. The media moved on to newer, fresher tragedies. But Detective Harding did not. He would park his car down the street from their house for hours at a time, just watching. He was waiting. He knew a secret was buried somewhere in Maple Creek. He just had to wait for the ground to give it up. Alara knew he was out there. A constant, silent reminder that it wasn't over. The body was still in the well, and the truth was a patient, persistent thing, waiting for its moment to surface. Winter in Maple Creek was a time of enforced stillness. A thick blanket of snow covered the manicured lawns and dormant rose bushes, muffling the world in a deceptive quiet. For Alara, the silence was a welcome reprieve. The media had gone, the neighborhood whispers had faded, and even Detective Harding's stakeouts became less frequent. The case of the missing Liam Vance was officially cold, a file collecting dust on a desk, a ghost that haunted only the Vance family home. Inside those walls, the chill was more than just seasonal. A permanent frost had settled between Alara and Thomas. He had chosen to believe her, or at least to act as though he did. But the trust that had been the bedrock of their marriage was fractured. He looked at her differently now, his eyes sometimes holding a flicker of questioning, of a deep, unspoken fear. They moved through their days with a careful, brittle politeness, the easy intimacy they once shared replaced by a chasm of things unsaid. The secret Alara carried was a living thing between them, sucking the warmth from the air. She was more alone than she had ever been. She focused on the children, throwing herself into their lives with a desperate, fierce love. Their innocence was her only sanctuary. In their laughter, in their simple, unconditional affection, she could almost forget the monster she had become. She was a master of compartmentalization. There was Mommy, who baked cookies and read bedtime stories, and there was the other woman, the one who visited her in the dead of night, her hands remembering the weight of the trowel, the sickening drag of a body across stone, the final echoing splash in the darkness. As winter thawed into a wet, muddy spring, so too did the town's memory. Two local teenagers, bored on a Saturday afternoon and emboldened by the warmer weather, decided to go exploring in the woods behind the Vance neighborhood. They were looking for adventure, a place to drink a few stolen beers where no one would find them. They remembered the stories of the old farmer's well, a place their parents had warned them away from, which, of course, made it an irresistible destination. They found it easily, a circle of crumbling stones half hidden by overgrown bushes. The rotting wooden lid was slick with moss and spring rain. With a shared, mischievous grin, they used a fallen branch to pry it open, a task made easier by the crowbar Alara had used months before. The stench that rose from the darkness was immediate and overwhelming. It was a thick, putrid miasma of decay and stagnant water, a smell so vile it made them gag and stumble back. It was not the smell of damp earth and old stone. It was the smell of death. Peering over the edge, their eyes adjusting to the gloom, they saw something pale floating in the brackish water below. It was tangled with what looked like dark, heavy plastic. Horrified, they scrambled back through the woods, their adventure forgotten, and called 911. Detective Miles Harding was standing on the edge of the well within the hour. The moment he'd heard the location of the discovery, he knew. His gut, honed by 30 years of seeing the worst of human nature, had been telling him that the answer was close. He had waited patiently, and now the ground had given up its secret. The recovery was a grim, methodical process that took the rest of the day. A specialized team was called in. They pumped out gallons of foul water before winching up the heavy, tarpaulin-wrapped bundles. As they carefully unwrapped the first one on a plastic sheet laid out on the forest floor, even the most seasoned officers fell silent. The remains were dismembered, ravaged by months of immersion in water, but they were unmistakably human. Dental records would later provide the official confirmation, but Harding didn't need it. He had found Liam Vance. The news hit the Vances like a physical blow. Thomas collapsed, his grief raw and absolute, finally unleashed from the prison of uncertainty he had lived in for months. Alara played her part, her feigned shock and horror a masterpiece of deception. She held her weeping husband. She spoke to the police in a choked, devastated voice. She accepted the sympathetic casseroles from the neighbors who now flocked to her door, their previous suspicions washed away by the tide of shared tragedy. She was once again the grieving sister-in-law, the victim of a monstrous crime that had unfolded, unknowingly, just a quarter-mile from her own backyard. But her performance was for everyone else. For Harding, the game was over. He came for her the next day. He didn't send a uniformed officer to the door. He came himself, just as he had the first time. He found her in the garden, listlessly pruning her roses, her hands protected by a pair of clean gloves. He stood on the patio, in the exact spot where Liam had fallen. "We found something else in the well, Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of triumph. "Tangled up in the ropes around one of the bundles. It's small. Easy to miss." He held up a small plastic evidence bag. Inside was a single, muddy button. It was a distinctive mother-of-pearl button. "Forensics are still cleaning it up," Harding continued, "but it looks identical to the buttons on that trench coat you're so fond of, the one you were wearing in your family Christmas photo on the mantelpiece." Alara stared at the button